I want to thank the legislators that came here. I know you guys have been putting in long hours, and we appreciate your time on Saturday morning, more than I can say. To start this today, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Martin. He's the former chair of our board, chair of our advocacy committee, and a great chamber leader from Atmos Energy. Mark Martin.
Thanks, Candy. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, especially early on a Saturday morning. It's greatly appreciated. Just go over some logistics. There's plenty of coffee and pastries, so please, you eat them so we don't have to. Also, bathrooms are kind of out this hallway. You can either go the door and around or slide out this way. Also, our fine legislators are here for you. So if you guys have any questions, there should be note cards and pens at your chair, and just slide them to my left, which would be your right, and we'll gladly pick them up and try to get them as time permits. They do have other obligations, so we are going to wrap this up promptly at 9 o'clock. And last thing before we, I guess, get started, I'm going to introduce everybody. I think you already know them, but we got Senator Joe Bowen, Representative Suzanne Miles, Representative Jim Glenn, and Representative Tommy Thompson. And Representative Jim Gooch would have been here today, but he had a prior commitment, so we understand their scheduling is hectic, and so we wish he was here, but we know he's doing what he needs to be doing. With that, I'll go ahead and get some things started. And Joe, if you don't mind starting with you, and we'll kind of work down. Why don't you kind of just give everybody just a brief synopsis of maybe the committees that you're on and or head, just so that everyone has an understanding of all of our legislators' involvement.
Sure, be glad to do that, Mark. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to one of my constituents, and I think it's the first time that I've seen him here. Perhaps you've been here before, Kyle, but we have Kyle Estes, Superintendent of Schools over in Hancock County, so I'm really glad that you're here today, Kyle, and welcome. I'm Joe Bowen. I'm in the State Senate, one of 38 in the State Senate. I have several different responsibilities in Frankfort, key to which is chairmanship of the State and Local Government Committee. In addition to that, I serve on the Licensing and Occupation Committee and the Transportation Committee. I've been involved with some work groups regarding pensions. It's consumed a huge amount of my time in the past year. So I kind of have lived on the corner of Main and Main when it comes to that issue. It's good to see all of you all turn out on a Saturday morning. That's uplifting to us because we know that you folks care, and we're up there to serve you. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Joe. Suzanne?
Suzanne Miles, State Rep for the 7th. I represent all of Union, a piece of Henderson, and a piece of Davis County. The committees that I'm on is Agriculture, Small Business, State Government, and Judiciary. We've been spending a lot of time on, actually I brought the transportation budget that's been released this week and also the budget for the state. So I'll be spending a lot of time reading and making notes on that this weekend. We do have our proposal from the governor. I know we've got several people in the audience here today to ask us questions about that. And I also see several people that have already been to Frankfort to visit us. So we always appreciate you all being up. I know Dr. Williams was up for the address on Tuesday night. And we really appreciate you all whenever you come up to visit. But please let us know what your thoughts are. I know Judge Wethington has some thoughts for me this morning, I have a feeling. But we can't, all the proposals so far have been out there. As far as the final result is not there yet, so we've got a lot of work to do, but we need your help in making those decisions. So please let us know what's going on.
How you doing? I'm Jim Glenn. The committees I sit on is Veterans and Public Safety, which has to do with the police force, state police, A&R, which writes the state budget, Agriculture and Small Business. This community is an agricultural community. Education, State Government, which handles the pension on the House side, and the Budget Committee for Higher Education, Post-Secondary Education Budget Committee. So that's what I work on and things that I do in Frankfort. Pass it on.
All right. Good morning. I'm State Representative Tommy Thompson. I represent the 14th Legislative District, which is the eastern portion of Davis County and all of Ohio County. And I want to thank you all for being here this morning. I want to thank the Chamber, Mark and Candace, for your all's continued sponsorship of this. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have a dialogue with you all about issues that you're concerned about and give us an opportunity to share with you a few things that are going on in Frankfort now that we've kind of completed our 17th legislative day. But the heavy lifting is going to really start because, as was mentioned, the governor delivered his budget this past Tuesday, and that's the chief driving public policy document for the state. So we're going to be spending a lot of time on that and hopefully talking a little bit more about it today. I serve on the Appropriation and Revenue Committee, the State Government Committee, Economic Development, and the Rules Committee and Banking and Insurance. And as I said, we've got some interesting challenges before us. We had a good group of CASA folks from Owensboro and Davis County, Larry, up earlier in the session. I think on February the 11th, I want to remind everybody, I think that's the date, Candace, that we have West Kentucky Night, and I believe the leadership of Owensboro group is coming up that day. In February the 4th or so, we're having some folks up from the Ford Center. Some young high school students are coming up. So you all come up early and often if you can. Bring some fresh air with you. But thanks again for being here and look forward to talking with you more today.
Thanks, everybody. I'll go ahead and get it started. I know there's probably some other questions from the audience, but if my memory holds true and I don't mess up the dates, the governor announced his budget for the biennial on Tuesday.
The 26th, yeah.
The chamber released their community priorities list on Wednesday, which was a joint effort between the chamber, the EDC, city and county government. So we know we can't get everything we want, but help coach us what's realistic on our community priorities list that may or may not be successful. And not to show favoritism, Tommy, if you want to start and we'll work back towards me.
Yeah, just a quick overview. The governor did present his budget this past Tuesday. He told us in advance it was going to be an austere budget. The theme of it was getting Kentucky's financial house in order, and with that, the thesis and the main focus is on restoring some balance and funding solvency to our unfunded and significantly underfunded state pension plans. And with that, he appropriated about $1 billion over the biennium into the pension plan. But in order to secure those funds, because we don't have enough revenue that's going to be expected to be generated over the next couple of years, he had to impose some pretty significant cuts in programs. Altogether, there's going to be about $650 million in proposed cuts over the biennium, 4.5% in the balance of this fiscal year, and then another 4.5% in 17, and then flatline that 9% total into 18. About 70% of the state agencies that realize general fund dollars are being protected from those cuts, things like the SEEK program and veterans programs, Medicaid, corrections. Those are being protected from those 9% cuts. But the other 30% of the budget is not, particularly post-secondary education has not been protected from those. The strands of education like safe schools and preschool activities, Friskies, are not being saved from those cuts. So as I said, it's a pretty austere budget. When we look into the issues though for Davis County, as Mark asked us on the priorities, the family court judge, of course, was a top priority judge, and I'm pleased to say that the judiciary budget does include funding of about, I think it's $369,000 in the first year and about $346,000 in the second year to establish a family court judge and family court in Davis County. We're the largest county in Kentucky that doesn't have a family court judge. So I was pleased to see that in there. Now our charge is going to be to keep it in the budget as it works its way through, and hopefully that we can. But in the past, Judge Minton has supported it, but we haven't had the funding for it. Now we have both. We have his endorsement and we have the funding. And on the family residency program, which is a top priority for the community, there's been meetings on that. We had some folks up from the hospital last week, met with Joni Jenkins on our side. She heads up our budget review subcommittee that's germane to that issue. Talked about the need to establish a family residency program in Davis County. It's going to cost about $400,000, and as we talked earlier, those dollars are short. But I've talked to Joni after the meeting, and she was receptive to it, understands the importance of needing more family practitioners. So hopefully we can pursue that. Just quickly, Some other things I think in the budget that were really good for Davis County, we've got about $9.5 million was in the budget for 3 capital projects, Scott, out at the community college. So that was great. And on the road fund side, we've got some good funds placed in there. Not only is it sustaining some money that we already had in the road fund for like Highway 54 and some other projects, but we've got $21 million in there to start the process of making the Natcher Parkway, I-65 spur, I-565. It's going to cost somewhere between, Joe and I were told the other day when we met with the highway folks, about $67 to $77 million to upgrade those interchanges and the Natcher Parkway to interstate standards. And so we've got in the budget about $21 million to start that process of upgrading those interchanges to get to that standard. And also, one great thing that we have in there is there's about $44 million in there to move the I-69 project forward with an environmental study, with the alignment of the bridge, and with the financing plan. The governor's got about $44 million in there for that. So I thought that was really good. We all know the importance of I-69, and of course, the key ingredients, that bridge across the Ohio River, that's where the real cost is. So on balance, I think a large part of the budget is really good. We're going to start dissecting it now in the House. We've got 7 budget review subcommittees, which comprise about 65 of our members that are involved in looking at the budget, hearing testimony. We'll vote the budget out on our side probably in the early part of March, send it over to Senator Bowen and the Senate, and they'll go through their review, and hopefully we'll pass a budget that can move this state forward by the time we sign and die in mid-April.
And that's it. Budget's only 21 billion, and Representative Thompson basically covered it all. We've taken some major hits over the last 8 years. A $1.6 billion cut starting in 2008, and now we're taking a $650 million cut. That's $2 billion, $2.2 billion in cuts over the last 8 years. This is going to be major. Where we're going to get the resources from? If you notice that the economy in the United States is slowing down, our growth in the last quarter last year was only 0.7%. And it's not only like that here, it's like that every place in the world. Everybody's economy is slowing down. We have to figure out some way to jumpstart the economy, which is why they're asking for incomes to be increased, the minimum wage to be increased. They're trying to find some way to jumpstart the economy. Everybody is struggling, and I mean in Europe, in South America, in China, in India, except for India. I heard a report that the Indians are moving back to India in large numbers because their economy is growing faster than anybody else's. But those are the major things we have to look forward to over this next 30 days.
I'll just kind of follow up on Representative Thompson. A lot of the things, well, and Representative Glenn too, a lot of the things on the community project specifically, a lot of the items that you all have as your top priorities are the ones that you all came in loud voices to see us in Frankfort and see us in the grocery store and everywhere else you see us in the community. So, I mean, as far as the infrastructure projects were huge, and a lot of that came from, I know Candace came up with Brad Snyder with the Kendall out of Henderson area, and that was a joint effort on the I-69 and the William Natcher upgrade. So a lot of the items that are taking place, same way with Family Court, everyone came together to come to us and say, this is what we need and this is what we're willing to work with to try to make that happen. So just to kind of give you an idea, whenever you go down these community projects, there was a lot of work that went in from you all to come to us to help on a lot of these items. So a lot of the things that are going to come to fruition is from your work. So keep that in mind whenever you all come up with different things that are your top priorities. You know, the potential for us to have interstate access in Owensboro is huge, and the window is here. The window's here, and I've always heard in the past people say, oh, not in my lifetime, but, well, I'm telling you, in my lifetime, we're going to see interstate access. And I'm very, very excited about that. The family court is a necessity. We know ifs, ands, and buts about it. Every single community that you go into, family courts is a necessity. And I know it doesn't affect everybody, but I will think that if you look through your family and a lot of different things, you'll find out it affects our community to not have family court right now. So those are some of the main things. But the main reasons a lot of these items, even though they're community projects that came from you all, you've done a whole lot of work to get it there for those to be in these budgets and for us to be looking at those. So thank you all.
It's interesting that Suzanne mentioned when we're at the grocery store, we see you folks. I tell you, for me, this past year on aisle 1, it's been KTRS pensions. On aisle 2, it's been Kentucky employees pensions. And then aisle 3, it's been back to teachers pensions. So that's the world that I've lived in, and I'm glad to be there. Let me say this, and I want to make this very plain and very clear this morning, that the Bevan administration and the Kentucky State Senate is committed to resolving the pension issues in the state of Kentucky. Make no mistake about that. In the governor's address last Tuesday night, you heard that he committed $1.1 billion to the state pension challenge that we have. And additionally, he committed $1 billion that's going to be going into a trust fund to pay down future obligations. Does that get us all the way home? No, it doesn't. But it's the best start, the only start really in the last probably 12 years that we've had in addressing the pension issue. So what does this do? The $1.1 billion, just to give you kind of a quick synopsis of how this actually plays out. What the governor committed to in his budget was an additional $300 million ARC payment over and above the 13.1% payroll match that we make to the retired teachers plan now. So it's $300 million in the first year, it's roughly speaking, and it's $300 million in the next year. Now that's a good start. That's actually more appropriation than the work group that I was involved with over the summer that the Governor Beshear had commissioned. That's actually more money than was suggested through the work of that work group. So this is a great start. Now on the KRS side, because we obviously are very challenged with our Kentucky employees retirement system as well, on that side, what he's committed to is $60 million additional ARC money in the first year, $70 million additional money in the second year. But he's gone a step further and committed a $45 million ARC Plus payment. So we are, in my opinion, on the road to recovery if we are disciplined to get these issues resolved. And I will tell you that I am committed to do that. There's only been 3 strategies to resolve this issue, one of which was bonding $3.3 billion. And I can tell you folks right now, that's not going to happen. It simply that is not going to be the way that we try to dig out of this challenge that we have in front of us. So that leaves 2 other strategies. One, myself and 2 other legislators, Senator Higdon on the Senate side, Senator Montel on the House side, have worked tirelessly to come up with legislation that we thought properly addressed the pension issue. And it's the result of the work that we did and the information that we got on the work group this past summer. So it was good information. That was a very worthwhile exercise, even though that committee did not come with one solution to the problem. It was a very worthwhile exercise. That legislation hasn't been filed. It hasn't been drafted because we wanted to sit back and see what the governor's approach was ultimately going to be. Well, we saw that Tuesday night. So what we've decided to do is to support his strategy. It's sound strategy. And it doesn't provide, going in, it doesn't provide for any structural changes. It only addresses the funding issue. In addition to that, he's going to audit the systems. That's his prerogative. He's going to dig deep and see what the underlying root causes of this problem are. So we support that, but we support his approach of, first and foremost, appropriating money to get the systems on solid ground. So that's our position, and I can tell you, I'll assure you that the State Senate, in my opinion, is not going to waver from that. I will tell you this additionally, and it's important to know that we're all in this together, and the governor emphasizes that we are Kentucky, and we are. It's not us that is Kentucky. It's not you that is Kentucky. It's all of us that are Kentucky. And truly, united we stand and divided we fall. And we have to address our issues and our problems in that vein. Now, the governor, in his address, laid out his priorities, and he challenged lawmakers. In the address that he made Tuesday night, he challenged lawmakers to focus on infrastructure needs, and I think his budget reflects that. He wants us to transform the healthcare delivery system and invest in education. These are commitments that he's made, and he's challenged us as legislators to live up to it. And I think these are worthy challenges, and I think these are challenges that we should all support and submit to. He challenged us to address substance abuse. It is a complete tragedy across the state of Kentucky. We're only one knee injury away, David, from maybe being hooked on meth or cocaine or whatever. That's how these things start. So we do need to address our substance abuse problem in the state of Kentucky. Now, did he make cuts? Yeah, he made cuts. He had to make cuts, but he promised that he would not touch those services that touch the people. So that is a commitment that I can live with. I support what he said Tuesday night. I think it gets us off on the right track. And I think you'll find that in the Kentucky State Senate, we're going to be behind it 100%. So, I'm here to answer any questions in that regard, or what we've been doing this past couple of weeks in the Senate, and we've done some things, passed 15 bills. We've gotten along. We've cooperated with one another. We haven't been bickering. Democrats and Republicans alike have been promoting what we think is good public policy in an adult way. Thank you all.
Thank you. We've received several questions, and I'm going to try to combine and aggregate together, but they all relate to post-secondary education and post-education budget. The governor's proposed budget looks to cut, post-secondary education. How will that outcome benefit/hinder students' ability to pursue degrees with Kentucky lacking in an educated workforce? And then to follow up on that, how does the governor want to increase, or why does the governor, want to increase regulations on higher education funding needs?
Well, let me just say that, there's no question that the number one challenge that our state faces is this unfunded nature of our pension plans, and we've got two obligations there. We first have got to meet the commitment and follow the promise that we made to our good state employees and teachers that have paid into that plan and expect that pension to be there when it's time for them to draw. And we've got to make sure that we honor that promise. But going forward, we've got to ensure that it's financially sound. And so that's why it's important that this money is being put into it to establish those objectives and honor that promise. But with that comes sacrifices, because that $1 billion is more than all the revenue that is forecasted to be realized over the biennium and the surplus that we're going to generate at the end of this year. So as you can see, what happens is the investment there starts to crowd out investments in other areas, particularly in post-secondary. So and to give you an idea, unfortunately, post-secondary was not one of those agencies that was protected from that 9% cut. So post-secondary is going to be receiving in this biennium about $231 million less than they did in 2008. And just to give you one aspect of that, UK is going to get about $12 million less in this fiscal year and $25 million less in next fiscal year. So it's going to be a burden, probably going to put more pressure on tuition, which is a tax, unfortunately, on students. So I hope as we work on the budget that we can find a way to maybe find some additional dollars to put into post-secondary, because I think it's so important, particularly in our community colleges that are working so hard in an area that I think is critical for this state moving forward, and that's workforce development, which they play such a critical role in. And I do want to applaud the governor. He's got $100 million of bonds in the plan to establish workforce development centers where they can effect more training for workforce development. So that's really important. But also, as a part of those cuts, the governor is going to institute performance-based funding going forward, or outcome-based forward, if you will. Now, we don't know what those metrics are. We think some of them may be, of course, graduation rates. but the governor is talking about we need to graduate folks in disciplines where they're jobs. And he used the analogy one time between if you want to study to be an engineer, fine, but if you want to study to be a literature major, we're not going to subsidize that with tax dollars. So, we want to graduate people where there are jobs after they get that degree. So that performance-based funding will kick in where about a third of their funding in 17 will come from that, and then 2/3 in 18 and 19, and then by 2020, 100%. So there's going to be this pot over here, and if you meet your objectives and reach those standards, those metrics that are yet to be decided, then that money will be taken from there and your programs will be funded. So, but it's just post-secondary is so important, and we need, whether people get certificates, whether they get, a 2-year associate degree, whether they go on to a 4-year public university, it's important that they have that additional education so they can have the skills to be employable. So again, that's one of the unfortunate cuts and consequences of putting so much money into the budget. As I said, I hope going forward on our side that we can find some additional dollars that we can put into post-secondary, but there's going to be some challenges there.
Anybody want to add anything?
Yeah,
If-
Mike, Mark.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you have any ideas on growth, this economy is about growth, people. It's not about the pensions. I know everybody's concerned about the pensions. The pensions will take care of itself over the long haul. It's like a mortgage. You pay a little bit every month, and after 30 years, your mortgage is paid off. I don't see a problem. I'm a teacher, and I'm not worried about the pensions. I am worried about the economic growth in this community, in this state, in this country, headed forward. That is a serious problem. We need technology. We need education. We need scholarships for our students. We have to find some way to get our young people up to speed and running forward so we have enough money to invest in our pensions and invest in the growth of the society. That's what we need to be focusing on. From my perspective, that's what we need to be focusing on. And if you have any ideas in that general area, I really would appreciate it.
Joe?
If I might, in my view, the system that is really challenged is our community college system because they don't have the capacity, have not had the capacity to increase tuition like our 4-year institutions have. So that's where the real challenge lies. My heart doesn't bleed for the 4-year institutions like it does for the community college institutions because it's not a level playing field. They don't play in the same arena as the 4-year institutions do. When we talk about cuts to our state universities, to our 4-year institutions, you have to understand that the appropriation from the state of Kentucky only represents something like 17% of their entire budget. So when they say that we have cut them by 9%, 10%, cut their budget by that much, that's actually not factual. What we have done is cut that 17% of their budget. So it is not as impactful as it might be articulated to you. Do we need to be cognizant of it? Yes, but we need to be more cognizant of what's going on at the community college level because those folks have had to play under far greater challenges than the 4-year institutions have had to play under. So, and another thing to consider too, when we talk about our 4-year institutions and the cuts that they've had, they need to get their house in order as well. Student debt is out of control. And the state of Kentucky is 4th in the growth of student loans across the nation in the last 6 years. So we've got a problem there. Now, our young students going off to college can't be strapped with this debt and expect to go out and recoup on that debt, pay it back, and get a good start in life. So we've got a mindset challenge. We have the mindset that everybody needs a 4-year education. You know what people need? They need a skill to go out and get a job and be productive. I'm a fan of the community college system. I think that's where our focus needs to be. And we need to uplift those that say, You have a worthy degree when you graduate from the community college system. Not everyone needs to go and get a 4-year degree and strap themselves with $40,000 worth of debt when they walk out of there with that sheepskin. That's my position, and I think it's a change in the mindset that we, in society, that we need to really look at.
And on the education, go ahead, Charlie. And on the education side, you have to keep in mind too, I don't know if there's anyone in the room that might not already have their degree, but they have a few classes or they have a few hours, and then for whatever reason, economics has forced them to leave the education system. And those are the ones that we need to make sure that we go back and try to help them make sure that they get their education. I know that, you know, as far as based upon performance, I'm not worried about our community college here as far as based on performance, or even Henderson Community College for that matter, because they, you know, they have redirected where they focus on educating their people, because they're basing their outcomes and their programs based upon the needs that are being delivered from them. I know Hancock County spends a lot of time on making sure whatever they need to fill jobs in those plants and things like that, the community college is supplying that demand. So, you know, I agree with him as far as, I agree with him on a lot of things as far as that goes, but as a whole, we do need to skill people, and whatever that may be. I'll coin a phrase from across the river that I'd seen recently, and one of their main things is to skill up. You know, they need to skill up. We've got a lot of people that need to skill up because we've got a big gap in where we we have jobs that are available, but getting people into those jobs and trained for those jobs is where we've got a big gap. So we do need to make sure that we have available avenues. But, you know, as far, and it was said this past week, we cannot borrow our way out of debt. We just are not going to be able to borrow our way out of debt, because here we are severely in debt, and we're going to have to make sure that we figure out a way going forward that we're not looking at what we're looking at right now with these pensions.
I've been teaching at community college for 27 years, the community college here. I started in a grocery store downtown on 9th Street. When I came here, the 4-year college graduation rate was 13%. Here we are, fast forwarding 27 years forward. The graduation rate in our community is 17%. Graduation rate in the state of Kentucky is 23, in the United States is 30. We have to find some way to get those numbers up. Don't get me wrong. We've increased the graduation rate in our community 30% in the 27 years I've been here. But it's not enough, and it's not moving fast enough. We have to make an effort to make sure our kids get scholarship. Inside my family, my mother is a great-grandmother, I should say. And 70% of her offspring have college degrees. We make an effort to give the people inside my family, all of us, send them checks to make sure they can get through school. Because this getting through school is getting expensive. And all the family members in my family issue checks to all the other family members that are going. My son's still at University of Maryland, completing a college degree. We're just making sure we send them money to make sure they complete. We have to make an effort to do that as a society also. It impacts our future and our children's future. And we have to wait some way to make sure they have money to buy houses and cars and start families. If we don't do that, they won't have children because they won't be able to afford them. They won't buy houses, which will impact the building industry, will impact the real estate industry. We have to help our kids. Thank you.
And we want them to buy houses. And the only quick thing I'd add, we really need to applaud this community, because people like you all and the folks in our community understand the importance of education. That's why, because of you and a lot of others in this community, we're going to have the Advanced Technology Center too. You know, we had to raise about $4 million, Scott, as you know, locally, to make that a reality, but we did it. And now we're going to see that great project into fruition, and that's going to help our kids get the skills and our adults get the skills they need to be employable and successful going forward.
Thank you. We know the budget is priority one. Okay, that is, if you nothing else is accomplished, the budget has to be accomplished, but is there any chance for tax reform this session? And cannot tax reform increase revenues through economic development rather than tax increases to meet program and pension long-term needs?
You know, I don't see tax reform in this session. The governor said very clearly in his budget that the budget contained no tax increases and no tax reductions. We need tax reform in this state. As you all know, we've studied it to death. How many books are on the shelf talking about tax reform? The most recent one was a commission that former Lieutenant Governor Abramson chaired, came up with 57 different recommendations, in the aggregate raised $750 million across the board. And everybody's for tax reform as long as it doesn't tax them. But, you know, we've got to look at it. We've got to have a tax system that's more elastic, that grows with our economy,
Yep.
which ours really doesn't. It needs to be broader based. Obviously, it needs to be fair. It needs to be competitive with other states so that we can attract jobs here. You know, we've got to be candid with you. We've got to have more revenue. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes to pay more taxes. But, you know, if we can broaden our base and look at some other areas. But you just see now what happens with a shortage of revenue. There's pain. And that pain is expensive and has consequences. So, you know, I hope, and of course, every time there's an excuse, well, we can't do it this year because it's an election year, and then next year we can't do it for something else. But I just hope we'll have the fortitude to really attack that issue and look at it in a responsible way and try to provide the resources that are necessary to move this state forward.
As adults, you have to understand, whoever implements that tax fund or tax reform will not be in office the next year. So you understand that. That's the problem, that all this stuff is being slowed down. Everybody knows what has to be done, but whoever implements it won't be here next time. And these guys may not see it, I'm seeing it.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, let's talk about, if we may, P3. This week, Representative Combs and Senator Wise filed for those folks that may not know, the public-private partnership, more commonly known as P3 legislation. The Kentucky State Chamber, as well as other local chambers, have supported the initiative in the past. What are the prospects of this legislation passing this session?
Well, since it's in our chamber, let me just quickly kick that off. It's House Bill 309. I've co-sponsored that. I think it's a critical piece of legislation. You know, the concept is so well heeled where you have the state that can't provide all its needs using its own resources. You have the private sector that in a lot of cases can't accomplish an objective with just its resources. But if they combined their resources, they can accomplish jointly what they could not do individually. We're seeing those public-private partnerships already in Kentucky. Universities are using it. UK and Western, it's student housing. We have public-private partnerships. Our Medicaid system, our MCO system, is a public-private partnership. But in Kentucky, we can't do mega projects such as bridges and interstates with that P3 mechanism. I think it's critical that we have that where we can combine the resources of the public and the private sector and realize a project that neither could do on their own. So we've got that legislation coming forward again. I think they've tweaked it to take out some of the objectives. The Northern Kentucky issue isn't in there this time, which has hampered it in the past with their bridge, which the governor said he's just now going to paint and fix up a little bit. I thought it was a great comment, too. The governor said nobody goes to a ribbon cutting when they're getting ready to work on the underside of a bridge. But we're going to put more money into our bridges, which we need to do. But P3s is a great concept. A lot of other states are using it. I think it makes sense. I hope we can. We passed the bill in the House last session. I'm pretty confident, Mark, to your good point, that I think it'll pass in the House overwhelmingly, and hopefully we can get it passed in the Senate.
Joe?
Mark, conceptually, P3 is a good thought, but the devil is always in the detail. And I would caution us to vet that out very thoroughly. P3 sounds good, and I think it has a place. But as a word of caution, and one of my ultimate litmus tests is, are there unintended consequences when we pass legislation? Playing the devil's advocate, let me give you the other side of P3 legislation. Private enterprise is in business to make a profit. Private enterprise doesn't have any other motivation other than to make a profit and give their shareholders a return. So I would only submit to you that if we do engage in a P3 project, it better be ironclad. Because if the project starts to head south, the private portion of a P3 project, they're going to get out of there. They're going to cut their losses and leave. So we have to be cautious. Conceptually, it sounds good. Are there unintended consequences? I would submit to you that there could be. Because when we're dealing with the private sector, they're in it for the money. They're in it to make a profit, as well they should be. They owe it to their stockholders. We engage in a project, it doesn't work out, you're going to lose one of your partners.
Thank you. Joe, this question is specifically for you. Senator Bowen, can you comment on Senate Bill 2 pertaining to the pension system audit?
Yes, I can. Senate Bill 2 is about transparency. Senate Bill 2 is about accountability. Senate Bill 2 is about being proactive. So what we're trying to do with that is to look at the makeup of our pension boards and make sure that the information that we're getting is accurate, correct, and timely. Currently, we have no access to any information, no contracts, how the fees are derived. We can't get to that information. Now, in my role as chairman of state and local government and as co-chairman of the Public Pension Oversight Board, I'm charged with the responsibility of overseeing those pension systems. But currently, all we have are boards that, quite frankly, operate under a veil of confidentiality, secrecy. We simply sit there and we listen to what they want to tell us. We can't affect the process. We can't challenge what they're doing. We can't look at the contracts. We paid $55 million in investment fees last year. So as a Public Pension Board Oversight Committee member, I don't know who we paid those fees to. I don't know what those contracts looked like. I don't know if real professionals were dealing with those things. So it's about transparency, it's about accountability, and it's about our ability to be proactive. You know, the General Assembly of Kentucky is the funding arm of the pensions. We're the ones that have to appropriate the money. So we need transparency in what's going on the investment side of that. And if, in fact, we can lend some expertise to that, then we should have the capacity to do that. And to me, anybody that's in one of these pension plans, whether it's KERS or KTRS, I would think that you would embrace that because it is going to bring that transparency. It is going to bring that professionalism. It is going to bring that accountability. What is actually happening with those $55 million worth of fees that we pay annually? So that's what it's about. It simply is going to give us the tools that we need to make good decisions as a Public Pension Oversight Board.
Thank you. Switching gears to prevailing wage. The elimination of prevailing wage has long been a priority of business groups, and we know that Senate Bill 9 has passed the Senate, which related to prevailing wage, and there has been some information of the possibility of the elimination of prevailing wage in the governor's budget. Can you comment on the prospect of each?
Well, you know, I guess we could start with me because the prevailing wage on school projects bill has passed the state Senate. And my position on that has never changed. I've always held that position that prevailing wage on school projects ought to be eliminated. I'm open for discussion on that. The challenge that I have is if the Apex Construction Company builds an office building, and those same workers, those same laborers, complete that job, and they go across the street and they build a schoolhouse, and they get 20% more in wages. So my question would be, Did your skill set increase by 20% when you walked across the street? Or did you short that company that you built the office building for? Did you not give it your best effort? Did you slack off 20% in building that project? So that's the part of prevailing wage that I really don't understand. You take a project that costs this amount of money, you go across the street, we build a school facility, and it costs 20% more. In this day of sacrifice, it would appear to me that that's one area where the sacrifice needs to be shared. But let me tell you something in addition. We do this, in my opinion, and Superintendent Estes, you'll probably disagree with me on this, and that's fine. But when we build our school facilities, to me, it would make sense if we had a set of plans already designed, maybe 4 or 5 options. And if you were building a facility that had to accommodate this many children and these many activities, you could go to the state of Kentucky, we could pull out of that file a plan that's already been engineered and designed and apply it to that project. We have to pay engineering and design on every school project that we do. Why wouldn't we operate like Target or McDonald's or somebody like this that builds the same facility all across the country? That would make sense to me. You know, I travel down to Franklin, Kentucky, because we have a business down there, and I go down 31W, and Kyle, you'll have to admit, South Warren, that facility down there will blow your mind, and taxpayers paid for that, and it is far better than anything that you have in Hancock County. There is no question about it. So we go about this school construction in the wrong way, in my opinion. I think we ought to have a set of designs that we could apply to any project that's out there across the state of Kentucky, and we would save that expense of engineering and design on the front end.
My disappointment on the prevailing wage conversation, so to speak, is a lot of times when people come to us and they want to say, well, prevailing wage should be paid because if you don't use prevailing wage, then you're going to have unskilled labor. And I think that's a slap in the face for everyone out there that's a skilled labor that goes out to work that might not be making prevailing wage on something, or a company might not be paying that. I know that I've asked the question, I've never gotten the answer for it. I was kind of curious what the difference, whenever we built the convention center, what would have been the difference with prevailing wage being paid for that or not being paid for that? And, you know, we've never really gotten those numbers, because I think if you actually see those numbers, then you can start evaluating, you know, is the quality of a job not going to be done well unless prevailing wage is paid? Think about that. And a lot of times we go to the grocery store and shop, and we might buy a loaf of bread that might be just as good as a brand name loaf of bread, but yet it's your choice and decision to make that choice. You know, on prevailing wage, we're not getting that choice to actually do that shopping and kind of make some good choices on that. And I'll go back on, you know, the transparency on the boards and things like that. I don't know of one person in here, and if you do, I think you need to maybe think twice about this. I don't know one person in here that doesn't get their credit card bill and go down the list to make sure those charges are yours. You know, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people shaking their heads. I'm not hearing many amens out there, but, you know, as far as a lot of the transparency that we're asking for, a lot of the things that we're, you know, you come to us and you might be upset with us that you don't get this or you don't get that. But whenever we're asking the questions of how and why is money being spent, I think it's only fair for us to be able to ask those questions and for there not to be people up in arms of us asking those questions of the accountability for things. So, you know, we are stewards for you all, and that's what our job is as elected officials. And I want you all to keep that in mind, that whenever we ask the questions on a lot of these things, we're not doing it from a self-servant standpoint. We're doing it from the standpoint of the person sitting beside you is picking up that tab for that. So kind of keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about a lot of the different things. A lot of the transparency on prevailing wage, whether it comes up in the House or not, so far they haven't given me the choice to pick and choose what I vote on in the House and discuss. So maybe someday we'll have that opportunity. But until that time, please keep in mind, whenever we ask the questions or we say no to something, it's because we're asking for the accountability from those organizations for the person sitting beside of you. So keep that in mind.
All right, I get one last question. K-12 education has been cut 12% over the past 8 years. Many other departments have experienced greater cuts. Why not an increase in the state sales tax rate?
Let me say one quick thing about that, and it's in reference to the tax code. In my opinion, if we had a fair tax code, a lot of our tax issues would be resolved. We don't have a fair tax code right now. We have a patchwork quilt of a tax code. We got a 1960s model that we're driving in the year 2016. We have a tax code that reflects the fact that anybody that has had any influence down through the years has been able to come to Frankfort and get a carve-out, get an exemption for their entity, their demographic, or whatever. So we have far too many exemptions. If we eliminated those exemptions that we actually should eliminate, we'd have a lot more tax revenue, and we probably wouldn't have to talk about increasing our sales tax.
And some of the exemptions don't even apply anymore.
Yeah,
They
we've
worked
got-
in the 1950s,
Yeah, we've
and they
got-
don't work anymore.
We've got so many exemptions to our sales tax, and of course, I think if you have to look at taxes, a sales tax is more prudent than a tax on production, like an income tax, because it's a consumption-based tax and you have a choice. But any tax, unfortunately, is a pull, but we need to broaden our tax base, so we hopefully grow our economy, more people paying taxes. A sales tax, I think, is fair. I like the local option vehicle. I hope we'll be looking at that again, where people have a choice on how they can grow their community. But the sales tax is, I think, a little more fair than putting a tax on income and putting a tax on productivity. One quick thing I just want to mention on the budget, there are a couple of really good things in there. We're giving increases to the state police, which we haven't done for years, correction officers. We're adding more social workers, which with their caseload is unbelievable. So there's money in there to do that. So there are some things, but we've got some tough sledding here as we go through.
Increasing
the next-
formula funding, Tommy, matching it up with the actual enrollment of students.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
State police need new cars. I don't think the public focuses on that. And we need them across the entire state, and we need more state policemen. And we don't have the funding for that either.
And I know we've got our judges in the room, so on the judicial side, don't forget, if there's something in that budget that concerns you, make sure that you come to us. Yes, Russ Wilkie, I see your. Absolutely. Come to us and let us know what your solutions are, and if there's an avenue, if there's anything in the budgets that you know within your organizations and your groups that you're willing to sacrifice a little bit on something else to get what you need in another category, let us know. Let us know what your thoughts are on those things.
But
We
it's
need your
really
help on
sad
that.
when we don't have the revenue we need, and you see these trends like the Friskies program that Kyle, you know about. God, it's so critical in schools where
a necessity.
kids come to school without glasses or without food, or, you know, they come from an abused family and so forth, and Friskies play such a critical role, and unfortunately, we're having to cut them $2 million in this budget. So, you know, those are some of the consequences of not having the sufficient revenue.
All right, well, I want to say thank you to Candy and the chamber staff for putting this together. I want to thank our senator and representatives for taking time out of your day. We appreciate all that you do for us here in the greater Owensboro area. I want to thank all of you for coming. Again, I do apologize, we could not get to every question. There were a lot of great questions. We filtered them the best we could. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and have a great rest of the weekend.